Hey, what's up YouTube? This is Airsoft Gaming giving you another video of internal upgrades. So this episode is going to be all about the gearbox. And I briefly touched it on the overview, but this is going to be a more in-depth kind of what's in your gearbox and what it actually does. So the first thing, as you see here, we have the Gearbox Shell. This happens to be a version 2. Version 3, the gears are located more forwardly in the gearbox. This is the most common. This is in A and K, the Masadas, M4s. Mostly any generic airsoft gun has a version 2. It's the most common out there. So the first thing you're going to notice in the Gearbox Shell is you're going to have an opening here, which is where the cylinder is able to be visible, an opening here where you can see the spring, and some other various holes for screws and whatever, and this over here for your plate for your selector switch that goes on the other side. The electrical trigger assembly is over in this area. These things right here are on each side of the gearbox. They are called bushings, most commonly coming in 6mm, 7mm, and 8mm. Generically, as you can see, these don't have any ball bearings. There's nothing really special about them, and they're just general bushings. Whereas these, which I got free in a package, so I have some, are much smaller. I guess these are 8mm, those are 7, and as you can see, there's a ring inside them, or if you can't really see, but what's supposed to be there in this region right here, between those two lines, are small ball bearings, and that generally takes the pressure off of the gears and improves the life of your gearbox. So on to the internal parts. So now I'm going to be talking about the two most vital assemblies to the gearbox, which is the cylinder assembly and the piston assembly. Both assemblies contain two parts, and first we'll start off with the cylinder assembly. Now, there's two components that make this up. There's the cylinder head and the cylinder. Two come apart real easy. Just have to take them apart like this. Now this is obviously upgraded. Most AEGs have plastic and one O-ring, such as this one. And it's also made out of a cheap polymer plastic, usually a low quality metal. And the job of this is to get all of the air compressed inside here through that air nozzle right there. And some of them will usually have a pad on the back to protect when the cylinder hits it, or the piston head hits it, that it won't be so rough and absorb some of the shock. And you can see the O-ring right there. That's where it goes to keep a good air seal. Now the actual cylinder here comes in different colors, and there's different types. This one is, as you can see, there is no hole in it like traditional cylinders, such as this one, and there's a reason why. The further back that you have this hole, the longer your barrel is. So per se, if I had this on a 300mm standard inner barrel, this would provide enough air to propel the BB through the entire barrel while pushing air behind it. Now if I put the same cylinder on a 550mm barrel, the BB would only be having air pressed behind it and propelling the BB out up to 300 millimeters. The rest of that space in the inner barrel is basically useless because there's no air pushing the BB out. It's just rolling out the barrel. Whereas if you have a full cylinder with the proper length, this supports 490mm and above. I'm using this with a 509, like an M16, that's the same inner barrel that it has for reference of length. It will provide enough air to propel the BB out the entire length of the barrel. So if the further back your hole is, the more compression and air that you have going to propel your BB out the barrel. So the next assembly is the piston assembly, which contains the piston and the piston head. Standard piston usually looks something like this, and this is the part that broke in my last gearbox because of a high-powered spring and basically a bad angle of engagement. So you can see there, that's where all the teeth are supposed to be, and that's what it's supposed to look like. So it just literally tore the teeth right up. So you want to make sure that your spring is powerful enough to accommodate your piston. As you can see, the upgraded version has full steel teeth. You can get these in polycarbonate or metal. I don't really see the need for metal, so this polycarbonate is fine, but make sure the teeth are steel if your spring is above an M125. The next part is the piston head here, which comes off. There's a screw that you have to unscrew from this side, and you'll see here, this is an upgraded part, obviously. A normal one, this is actually rather a nice standard one, but it'll either be ported or non-ported here, depending on if there's holes in the front. Typically there are. You've still got an O-ring here for a good tight air seal, and depending on here you may have ball bearings like this. And you can see this one I can actually show you on if it wants to cooperate. Not really, but if you can see, there's small metal balls right there that's displacing the amount of pressure being put on it, and that screws in there like that. So on to different assemblies and parts. So as you can see, this is what both assemblies look like inside the gearbox. Cylinder assembly, piston assembly. As you can see here, this is where the gears would be, and it would intersect the gears on here, the metal teeth, at the sector gear. And what that's going to do is it's going to compress the air right here, and that's going to be coming out the nozzle, and with the spring tension there, and the gears will cycle and will drag it back. And once the teeth are not in contact and it cycles, it's just going to slam forward with the weight of the spring, and all the air is going to come out of the cylinder head. Here is the spring guide and spring. Now these two correlate very well together because depending on whether you need a metal and ball bearing spring depends on how heavy your spring is. Typically most airsoft guns come with something around an M100 or around an M110. Shooting a .2 gram BB should give you around 330 FPS, give or take, or 350 compared to what kind of AEG that you get. So here's an example of an upgrade spring here with M125. Now, because this is an irregular pitch spring, there is no set amount. The M120 or M150 or whatever is a mathematical equation that calculates the abouts of what the FPS should be, but everything varies on depending on whether you have good compression or not, but it should give you a good idea of what you should be shooting at. Now an M125 shoots hot for most fields at about 430 through 450. I plan to use .28 BBs, hence, you know, more FPS needed to propel it out the barrel at about 400. So these come new, they're pretty cheap. Make sure that if you upgrade your spring beyond an M120, other upgrades are necessary. If you don't have a metal ball bearing spring guide, you might want to get one. Metal teeth, as mentioned on the piston, needs to be upgraded. You don't need to get a new piston head. You don't need to get a new cylinder head or cylinder. And another thing that would be strongly advised is that you get stronger gears, because those are going to wear out and break a lot more easier. And there's just going to be a lot more stress on your gearbox, so be aware of that, and you might want to get something like a high strength upgrade to increase the longevity of your gearbox as you increase the pressure being put inside of it. Also, if you have a cheap gearbox or want to upgrade to a heavier spring, a higher motor, battery, and gearbox shell may be required depending on how high your spring are. So this next assembly is real quick, I just wanted to add it in here, is the tappet plate and the air nozzle. So the job of this is there's going to be a spring attached to here and one to this post at the gearbox. And if you notice, if you have the gearbox fully assembled, you can press on this and it will go in and push back out. Now the point of this is while the BBs feed up from the magazine, as the gears turn, the sector gear engages this part right here, pushing it back. Now what that does is that loads a BB in, and when the sector gear reaches the point where it releases the piston as well as this plate, it pushes forward and loads the BB into the chamber as well as simultaneously letting the air through and pushing it out the barrel. So now on to the three parts where the gearbox gets its name, the gears. In most common AEG gearboxes, there are 3 gears, shown here, which simultaneously connect and make 4 connection points. From the piston to the sector gear to bevel gear, spur gear, my apologies, to bevel gear, and bevel gear to the pinion gear of the motor. So these 3 right here all serve different purposes. And basically what these gears do is convey the friction and power from the pinion gear of the motor to the piston. This one here engages both of the piston and the tappet plate. This bevel gear here transfers it from the pinion gear, and this one is just kind of in the middle of all of it. Now when you reinstall these in your gearbox, don't just set them down like so and expect everything to run fine. What you need to do is shim your gearbox, which I made to post a tutorial of, but you can look it up on YouTube. And basically what that does is that minimizes the friction coming from the motor all the way up to the piston, and that's absolutely vital to Airsoft. Because if you don't, you'll have gears winding, and sure, if you slap it together it may work, but it's not going to last for long, gears are going to break, and overall it's not going to be a good thing for your gearbox. As you can tell, yes, you can see it, the manufacturer did a bad job of shimming, so you can see there's this line right there, and that is due from this gear here being too low and grinding against the sides. And that's where you get that ring. So you can tell if your gearbox has unnecessary wear from bad shimming if you have these kind of signs there. So that about wraps it up about this episode of internal upgrades. This has just been a sort of in-depth overview of the gearbox. I'm sure I'll post videos of me upgrading gearboxes later on and going more in depth with tutorials on how to up your FPS or range or basically all that other stuff. This is a brief overview of the parts, what they do, how they go together, and to try to get you a better understanding. Not exactly a how to disassemble or reassemble a gearbox video, which those may be out soon if you guys request them. Just bonus information about the video. The gearbox here is the VSC Scar H gearbox. Hence the elongated air nozzle there. Upgraded parts I put in here was a double O-ring cylinder head, a full-length matrix cylinder, version 2 ball bearing spring guide, M125 spring, and I want to say that's about it as far as upgrades go. I'm going to be adding a 6.03 millimeter 510 millimeter inner barrel, and I upgraded the hop-up bucking. No, the bucking, as well as the nub. Never mind, I didn't upgrade the bucking. VFC is a very tight fit with all their hop-up units, so I just ended up doing the nub. I got a H, and that's about it. So, that's just information about the video. If you guys want to drop comments down below, suggestions for future videos, if you guys still have questions about anything, feel free to go ahead and ask me a question. I'll make sure to answer you with the most correct answer that I can provide. All the upgrades I put in this gun were Matrix, and I will leave links in the description if you guys choose to request it. So that wraps it up about this, and I will see you all in the next video.